The word family can conjure up a variety of images. The daily trials and joys of raising children. Special gatherings and occasions with relatives. The limitless experience and memories shared by brothers and sisters. A family is a group of people who share much more than a last name. They share a common history and heritage, and for one special group of people, a part of that identity comes from a house on Govier Street. The Gill home on Govier Street in Parsons saw quite a bit of activity. There were 5 children. Robert was the oldest, then came Alice, the only girl. John, Thomas, and Francis was the youngest. The house was only a few blocks from where Tom Sr. had grown up. In the mid-1800s, the potato famine in Ireland sent hundreds of thousands to the U.S. in hopes of a better life. For many, that meant mining, coal mining in the Northeast. John Gill was one of them. Although the Gill family lived in County Mayo, it is believed they originally hailed from the Isle of Man. But, like many other Europeans, John Gill started a new life in the U.S. First in Hawley, then in various coal patch towns, finally settling on Matson Avenue in Parsons.
Matson Avenue, double block on Matson Avenue, was where Papa's parents lived. That was the family homestead.
John and Mary Nolan Gill had 6 children: Annie, Katie, Thomas, Margaret, Mary, and Richard. Thomas, the oldest boy, helped to support the family by working as a breaker boy in the mines, a job he started when he was less than 10. Years later, a national coal miners' strike brought him, now a union rep, to Ohio. While there, he considered studying dentistry, but when the strike ended, he returned to the mines. 2 of Thomas's sisters entered the Order of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, Mother Marcella and Sister Ricarda. It was while visiting his sisters at the convent that Thomas met Margaret Gilroy from Pittston. Story has it that he originally was interested in one of the other Gilroy girls, and that Margaret was engaged to another.
You know, she was from up in Pittston. He'd walk from Pittston to Parson. I suspect that's how Papa had to court Grandma.
On July 16, 1912, Thomas Gill married Margaret Gilroy at St. John's Church in Pittston. The couple settled in Parsons, where they ran a store on George Avenue.
One of the things I remember in the store, they had the cartons of cookies with like the glass, like a door on top kind of thing. And the big treat when you were there was you would get like 1 washerboard cookie.
The store would offer, credit at no interest rates. Interest rates weren't a thing to think about. Just if somebody needed some food, you had a line of credit. Papa was never one to try to collect any money.
And the store always closed at noon on Wednesday, and he would take Grandma shopping then. But that was a ritual. They used to like to go to the Top Hat over in Kingston.
Marie, there was a time when she was driving, and she and Grandma would go to town or go someplace, but she didn't know how to park the car, against a curb or anything like that. So my father was 13 or 14 at that time. He'd have to go to be the designated parker. And, although they liked to go places, he still had to go and park the car for them.
Education was always stressed in the Gill household. Margaret was a high school graduate, and Tom took classes at night to get his diploma. At age 21, he graduated in a class of 5 from St. Mary's.
But there was a tremendous emphasis in the house on Govier Street on education. Of the 5 children that were born, all 5 graduated from college.
Of the 5 children, Alice was probably the best student of the group. She had graduated high school and college at an early age. Then, she, like her aunts, entered the Order of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. On a hot May 3, 1937, Sister Marita Gill wore her first full habit. She found it uncomfortable and heavy, but she endured it for many decades to come.
In Kingston at St. Ignatius, and the nuns had a can with a snake, one of those cloth snakes that jumped out, peanut brittle or whatever it was, and we had to pretend that we were surprised.
After graduating college, Robert Gill entered the priesthood. On April 23, 1940, he was ordained Father Nicholas Gill in Baltimore. John graduated from St. Thomas College in Scranton and went on to medical school in Philadelphia. Tom, who also attended St. Thomas, chose a different path, and after graduating law school at Penn, considered entering the FBI. Francis was a recent graduate of the newly named University of Scranton when he considered furthering his studies in business or accounting. Pearl Harbor, America's entrance into World War II. The three Gill boys, John, Tom, and Francis, all enlisted in the Navy.
He was on an aircraft carrier called the Shenango, and the planes would leave the aircraft carrier, and they would, go to the battle site, typically. It wasn't, I don't think that often that they had direct attacks on their planes, but he had a gun, a .45, and he gave it back to them. He really didn't see a need for it. There was two doctors on the aircraft carrier, and one was real grumpy and a very short line in front of the other guy because he was probably more patient with some of the guys that might not have wanted to work that day or maybe been hung over or something.
One of the ships Dad was on was torpedoed by a German boat near the African coast, near the Mediterranean. And yes, I had heard that Dad was the last guy off the ship. They couldn't find the captain. He was supposed to be the last guy off the ship, but he was already in one of the boats, safety boats, evidently. Uncle Fran spent a lot of time, I believe, in Cuba during the war because he was managing the minefields. Part of Uncle Fran's group, whoever it was in Cuba. They would actually guide the ships through the minefield so they wouldn't hit the mines.
It was during those war years that Francis married Patricia McGlynn, a classmate. The wedding was held at Holy Savior Church in East End, Pat's Parish, and the service was performed by Fran's older brother, Robert. But Francis wasn't the only Gill boy to tie the knot during the war.
It's my understanding that they met at a college mixer, at a dance. Rumor has it that she went up to him thinking he was someone else who had been calling her house and hanging up or something to that effect. And she went up and told him to stop calling her house and hanging up because her father was annoyed. And we know that our father would never do anything like that. You're the wrong gent. They evidently fell in love. The rest is history.
In 1942, Tom Gill married Mary Patricia Joyce from Pittston, daughter of former state senator Patrick Joyce. Joyce was said to have bore a striking resemblance to President Harding. This made for occasional confusion when the family visited Washington. Molly Crossan from Luzerne met Naval Officer John Gill at a dance and was rather unimpressed.
She said, "Mother, he doesn't even dance." So initially she didn't find him too exciting, but her mother thought that he was a nice man or a nice prospector. The story goes that there was a conflict of whether there'd be alcohol at the wedding. And I guess my grandmother Crossan said, well, it'll be hell of a wedding if there ain't no booze.
Eventually, they married in 1945, and for the third time, Sister Marita was unable to attend her brother's wedding. At the time, the order did not allow it. The brothers proceeded to establish a new generation of Gills and Parsons. Tom on Flick Street, Francis on Austin Avenue, and John on Mill Street.
Francis and I were 6, 8 years old. We'd be on our bikes all the time, running around through Parsons. We'd run by and see if Grandma wanted us to run up to Tony Adams, which was see if she wanted to get some chicken, and we'd go get them, and she'd always give us quarters. So it was a lucrative business.
That was our source of income back in those days. Well, she was a soft piece of money.
We used to have to go to St. Mary's from Parsons, and Dad would take a bunch of kids.
A lot of kids, 12, 15, what do I know?
At one point we had an old Buick, and it used to stall a lot. And so all the kids would jump out and push the car, and Dad would pop the clutch. As a kid, that was fun.
He was revered by the people of Parsons, and when I picture him in my mind, I think of him with a cigar in his mouth.
He used to chew them as much as smoke and kind of eat them.
He used to go and play cards at the American Legion or VFW right on George Avenue.
He was an expert player, so there was no reason why anybody should make certain plays. He was tolerant with you as a pupil, but I wouldn't want to be his partner in the game and make the mistake.
If you went over to Cato Street and then up, you went up behind, it was all, I guess it was strip mines is what it was. And we used to call that behind Polly's. We used to go up behind Polly's. And we used to ride sleds back there and just go up there and play. We had a yard then, so we would have things, we would have barbecue kind of things during the summer, and people would come for that.
I remember sitting on the porch with my father, and people come by, walking by, oh, Doc, I didn't want to bother you when you're in the office, but my back hurts.
With a growing family, I think he felt it was too much to be out on call and being called by people all the time.
John moved to New York to study radiology. While there, his fourth child, Kevin, was born. A few months later, Fran and Pat had their third, Brian. By the 1960s, John and his family were settled in 44. Fran was on George Ave, and Tom moved from Parsons to North End.
Big thing that I remember moving to 202 was we were allowed to ride our bikes. We were allowed to ride our own bikes. Probably there was room on the moving van. It was probably no privilege at all, but we just thought it was.
Actually, Tom, Ned, and I all had that room until, I would say Ned was about 12. There was barely enough room to walk between the beds to make the beds. And there was often cries in the night, Dad, Ned won't turn the light off, etc., etc. The girls always had their own rooms, while 6 boys bunked together.
And theirs was, of course, in the most convenient location, and when they came home late, they didn't have to walk past my parents' room. They really had it made.
These scattered and larger Gill families still found time to visit Govier Street every Sunday. These loyal sons, now dads, would spend the day with Grandma, while the children went on adventures with their grandfather.
Papa was comfortable with even little babies. He liked the kids around. He liked the kids being around him.
Sometimes he would take us for a ride, or for ice cream, or to the golf course.
I remember Grandma got to be a little foggy for a while and would forget people's names. She used to call Mark Carl.
Hey, my father used to take her blood pressure every time we went over there. That's what I remember.
A time that everybody got together, that like all your cousins got together. And we used to go up and climb down the creek, and we used to always fix the thing on Uncle John's car, so when he went over a speed limit, the buzzer would go off.
In April of 1961, Papa, as he was later known, died at the age of 80. The Gill store, now run by Francis, was still a main source for groceries.
Up and we'd go down to George Avenue. I just thought it was this real busy commercial district, the Avenue or something.
Yeah, Robert and Fran both worked there doing deliveries and things like that. Matter of fact, everybody except me, I think, learned how to drive a car by driving the 53 Ford truck that we had that used to make the deliveries. Everybody got a shot at learning how to drive a car that way.
As the years passed, there were many milestones marked by the families: birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. But for many, the biggest event was when an in-ground pool came to Jaeger Ave.
My sister Molly was the main force behind hounding my father into doing that, as I recall. She hounded him for years. And I do remember when we first got the in-ground pool, and I was the first person ever in that pool, by the way. The string was still up around it, the sidewalks weren't up yet.
With the death of Grandma Gill in 1965, Sunday gatherings on Govier Street ceased. But when Tom Gill bought a large old house in Bear Creek, that all changed.
It was fun out there. I mean, I think as a family we had lots of company, and I think when you talk about Uncle John's kids, I remember one summer, almost the whole summer, trying to teach Molly how to dive, and it just was lots of fun. That's a nice memory I have with Alice. We used to swim across the lake at night, at the time, she and I, and we'd swim together. So we would have, and one of us would always have a kickboard. We would just trade off.
There was always plenty of food, I remember that, and there was always a lot of people, and there may have been people there that weren't even family that just stopped by, because it was always the kind of thing that anyone might just drop in and everyone was welcome.
Probably the most memorable summer of that time was 1972, when Hurricane Agnes hit Wyoming Valley. That made for a crowded house in Bear Creek because of the high waters downtown.
But Kevin he decided to stay home. He had an old car that he had just gotten from Bonner Chevrolet, which is probably like a Chevrolet that must have been in the early mid-60s, like a Impala, and he stayed at the house, and the waters came. He tried to back the car out the driveway. It stalled right in the driveway, right near the road there, and he had to leave it, and he just kind of waded through the water, but it wasn't really a rushing kind of water. Everything was covered with mud. I remember actually your parents pulled up on one of those early days, in the first couple days that we were there.
Years passed and family gatherings were often limited to weddings, and like their parents before them, most of the Gill kids were married by Father Nick. Although he never lived in Northeast Pennsylvania, Father Nicholas Gill was very well acquainted with his nephews and nieces.
He would either borrow your father's station wagon at that point or Uncle John's Cadillac, and he would pack up as many that can fit in the car, maybe 7 to 8 people. He was adamant at that point when we were, for example, when we were at the Yankee game, not to call him Father Nicholas, because he said if people know I'm a priest, they'll come over and they'll be asking me for favors and all those things, and I don't want to go through all that stuff.
With the older kids, Father Nick was sometimes known as Uncle Bob, but when his niece Alice began calling him Fred, the name stuck.
And he would say, well, we're going to stop for dinner on the way home. And we'd say, where? And he'd say, well, we'll find a place. And he would pull into somebody's home that he knew with 9 kids, and we'd go in and they would they would treat us like we've been invited there for years.
But no family gathering would be complete without a visit from Sister Marita. She was a regular guest at events and the most reliable for sending cards. No birthday or anniversary ever passed without a note reminding her nephews and nieces they were in her prayers.
Her goal in life was to reform Jimmy, because she and Jimmy have the same birthday. And it seemed that was a special.
I do remember one time Sister Marita telling Jimmy out at your family's Bear Creek summer cottage that he said, Jimmy, why don't you give me that beer? I think you've had enough. He said, Sister, there's plenty in the fridge. Get your own.
Today, a new generation of Gills are making their way far beyond the boundaries of Parson, each with different goals, different dreams and aspirations, but they all share a common link, a common heritage to those 5 kids who grew up on Govier Street more than a half a century ago.